Sports Talk Chicago. Here Jon Zaghloul, and we are back and ready for today's special guest. He's an NFL insider, the host of Broncos Country Tonight on KOA 850 in Denver. Please welcome Benjamin Allbright to the program. Benjamin, great to have you on. How are you?
Good to be back. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for being here. What was your reaction to this crazy NFL trade deadline?
Oh, I thought there might have been a little bit more movement than there was with a couple players and a couple of teams, but I think most teams have kind of started to understand the compensatory formula and how that works, and they're not going to accept lesser compensation just to dump guys when they've got the opportunity to recoup some of that with the compensatory formula. I also think that the fans always seem like, well, we need to get assets for this guy. His contract's expiring at the end of the year, et cetera, et cetera. Teams don't really look at it like that. I mean, teams have to still suit up and play like 9-10 more games, right? So they need to have the bodies available to play those games. And so in some cases, when a guy doesn't get dealt, sometimes it's simply like, hey, look, we need this guy to be able to make it through the season. So, I think that fans and the fan outrage portion of it, I think that they maybe need to pump the brakes a little bit on some of that stuff when all's said and done.
How'd the Denver market react to the end of Von Miller?
I would say that they were emotional about Von Miller leaving, which, rightfully so. Von's been the face of the franchise and a community fixture for a decade. I would say that they understood, and I would also say that they're happy with George Paton for the haul that he got. I mean, he basically got a quarterback haul for Von Miller, and the only thing he had to do was eat the $9 million on the salary. Broncos have third most salary cap space in the league, so that's a non-issue for them. So I think fans are sad Von Miller is gone, happy they got what they got, happy he went to a contender. I think everybody involved is the happiest they could be in a situation where nobody's going to be happy.
What are the Rams getting Von Miller?
You're getting a locker room leader. You're getting a guy who's a different kind of leader, though. He's not one of those vocal leaders. He's one of those more keep the guys loose, entertain guys, keep guys having fun, that kind of guy. You're getting a guy who's still got productivity in him. I mean, Von Miller was prior to not playing in the Washington football game this past weekend, he was 5th in the NFL in quarterback pressures. And he still gets sacks. He's maybe not the player that he once was. I would not expect 15 sacks out of him, but I will say this, lining up with Aaron Donald is going to make it a lot easier for him to be able to do that, where he didn't really kind of have that here in Denver. Aaron Donald famously dragged Dante Fowler to 11 sacks a couple of years ago. So I shudder to think what Von Miller could do, because even at this stage in his career, Von Miller is better than Dante Fowler ever was. You're getting a rental that might push you over the top. That's really what it is. I think if you're a Rams fan, you got to be excited about it. I think if you're a Broncos fan, you're excited for him and excited for what they got, and you go from there.
How much did this bolster the Rams' Super Bowl chances?
I don't know. It remains to be seen how he fits in that defense and everything else. I think it helps. That's a stacked division. I mean, that might be the toughest division in football. You got an Arizona team over there right now. They're reeling from injury, but overall, it's a very good team. I mean, even the worst team in that division, depending on how you view Seattle or San Francisco, is still a very, very good football team. So I think it gives you enough that you got to say, you push all your chips in and do what you can. I think it gives you enough on paper to say, hey, look, we've got a shot. I don't know if that's enough to get past Arizona or not, or obviously the elephant in the room, Tom Brady down there in Tampa.
Benjamin Allbright here on Sports Talk Chicago. Benjamin, why did Deshaun Watson stay punt?
Couldn't get the off-field stuff resolved, and no GM was pushing all in, pushing their job all in with all those draft picks on somebody who may never even play for you. So at the end of the day, that's what it was. There's some bad reporting out there as people are kind of walking some things back on this. There was the framework of a deal. With Miami, they did have that stuff. Now Miami's embarrassed and they don't want that out there. But the reality is there was a framework of a deal in place, and they were working on that. But at the end of the day, the Dolphins and Chris Greer were just unwilling to push all those draft picks to the center of the table without the assurance that they were the money they were getting back was going to be able to play for them.
Do you think he's moved this offseason still, or what's his situation regarding the off-field stuff?
I think a lot of that's going to hinge on the off field, because the grand jury is going to come back with their recommendations next month. The civil suit will start taking depositions, I believe, late January, early February. So we'll have a clearer picture of where this thing is going by probably late February, when all said and done, and then we'll know from there. And the key here is, the grand jury, because if they come back with charges, then you're probably looking at a guy who's never going to play, or at least not going to play in the near term. If the grand jury doesn't recommend charges, then you've got to figure out what to do with those 22 civil cases, whether or not he can get settlements, NDAs, all that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that I'm not advocating for someone who's guilty of something to do that. I'm saying purely from a business perspective, if you want to acquire him, those are the things that need to be done.
Based on what you've seen, because you've done a lot of reporting on this case, do you see him ever playing in the NFL again?
Well, I didn't think Michael Vick was going to get a second chance. And sure enough, he did. And, Vic came back and had a decent career afterwards. So I'm not going to say no. I think that he probably will get another chance somewhere eventually. A ton of this really just hinges on this grand jury and whether or not criminal charges are filed. If criminal charges are not filed, I'll say yes. If criminal charges are filed, I will say he will not play again. If criminal charges are not filed, then I would say that he stands a pretty good shot at playing again.
Benjamin Allbright here on Sports Talk Chicago. Benjamin, how do you evaluate Justin Fields' performance on Sunday?
That was probably his best game. If we're being honest, although the bar was pretty low, Chicago fans hate me and they think I hate Justin Fields, which isn't the case. That's just not the case. And I'm not trying to do some PR spin because the Broncos took Pat Surtain. That's just ludicrous. The reality is I have to look at each one of these quarterbacks and evaluate them independently and objectively, and not as a fan. Like you people in Chicago are evaluating it as, I want this guy to grow into, whatever. I'm not looking at it like that. I'm looking at what is, and what is has not been particularly good. It's been a guy who processes the field too slowly, holds onto the ball too long. And to be fair to him, the supporting cast is not what he needs. The coaching staff is not very good. So I understand making those excuses for him, but I have to look at it in a vacuum and see about what is. And I have not seen franchise caliber quarterback. That that big run was jaw dropping. Man, that was fun to watch. He had a real sexy pass early on in that game. I was like, okay, now we're starting to see it. But the game has got to slow down for him, and it hasn't done that on a play-by-play basis yet. It might not. We'll see. But I'm gonna evaluate it fairly and objectively the entire time. And I will say that having seen Pat Surtain play and having seen Justin Fields play, I think the Broncos made the right choice, and I think the Bears made the right choice, and I'll leave it at that.
What do you think's the culprit for Fields so far? Is this an issue with him? Is it a Matt Nagy issue? Who's more to blame for where he is right now?
I always hate that. I always hate the whole playing the blame game. That's, is there anything to blame, or is this guy just is what he is from there? And so I like the blame game thing. Are the coaches setting him up to maximize him? No. Is the supporting cast around him where it needs to be for him to succeed? Obviously, no. At the same time, is he a guy that's going to elevate the talent around him? Haven't seen any evidence of that. So, I think those are the questions you have to ask. Right now, the only thing's Justin Fields can't help the coaches, and he can't help the supporting cast around him. So what he has to do is help the things he can help himself with, which is speeding up that processing clock. And the problem with this is, and we saw it at Ohio State, is he was playing with an elite offensive line and elite wide receivers, and he had more talent than anybody else surrounding him. And he was able to do things like, sit back there and wait forever for one of those track stars to come open and then put the ball to him. And that's why, this misnomer about him having such a great deep ball in college. Yes, he threw a great deep ball, but he also had all year to throw it. And he's just not going to get that in the NFL. In the NFL, 3 seconds is too long. Teddy Bridgewater right now here in Denver, he gets 2.91 seconds, and we're talking about holding the ball too long. Fields is right, is above that at 2.95. And then you get some of the worst in the league. I think Winston was over 3, but he had an incredible offensive line there in New Orleans. So, end of the day, I think that the best way to say this is, Justin Fields has some personal things that he needs to work on. He's got to do better at processing the field. He's got to do better at speeding things up. And if he can do that, well, then it won't matter that he's got a boat anchor of a coach and not enough talent around him.
You think Matt Nagy's gone at the end of the year?
100%.
Really? Why do you say that?
Best way to say this. From my conversations with people, the Browns have already started doing background on potential replacements.
So wait a minute, Matt Nagy and the Browns Could be
I'm
up.
sorry, the Bears. I'm sorry, the Bears. It's been one of those mornings. For my conversation, the Bears have already, not the Browns. The Bears have already started doing background on other on replacements.
Do you have any names you'd like to drop on who they could be looking at?
I'll say Brian Daboll would be the leader in the clubhouse.
What do you think that fit would be like here in Chicago? Would that be a good fit?
We'll see. I don't know how Brian Daboll's going to be as a head coach. You know, the thing about coordinators and the thing about this kind of stuff is, you know, everybody wants the hot X's and O's guy out there, right? But being a head coach requires a completely different skill set, you know? So oftentimes you don't want a tactician. And Chicago's a perfect example of this, all right? Because Chicago has hired some of the great X's and O's guys, you know, over the years. You go back and you look, Mark Trestman was an X's and O's guy. But he couldn't connect with players, and he lacked that CEO ability to be able to manage a football team. That's why his team was revolting on him in year 2. So, you know, it's a different skill set to be the head guy. You don't necessarily want the guy that was the best tactician, had the best offense. You want the guy that's able to find that guy and make him his offensive coordinator. And so, you know, does Brian Daboll have that skill set? I've talked to Coach Daboll a few times. He's a nice guy. We follow each other on Twitter, get you know, all that kind of stuff. I believe in him. I think he's probably the best hire in this coming off season, because I don't think Kellen Moore's going to leave Dallas. I think Jerry Jones is going to back a Brinks truck up, and his offensive coordinator might make more money than his head coach. But I think Brian Daboll would be a good hire. It'd be as good as hire as I could think of. You'd have to go through the interview process, and you know, Chicago's got 4 or 5 other guys they're gonna do some background on and do some interviewing on. I think they're going to do an interview with Vance Joseph. I don't know if they're actually going to, I don't know if he's actually in contention, but I think they'll do an interview with him. And I'll tell you, Vance Joseph in his first go around in Denver was a disaster, but looking at him now in Arizona, it looks like he's finally got it. You know, so there's something. I think Dan Quinn's going to get some interviews. I don't know if him in Chicago is one that really kind of works, but I think he would get some interviews. There's other guys out there. Nathaniel Hackett's going to get some interviews. You know, and then there'll be plenty of other names, you know, as it goes on. But out of the crop that's coming up this year, I think you have to look at Daboll as the leader in the clubhouse.
How do you think he'd mesh with Justin Fields? Would that be a good connection to have?
Well, yes, I think it could be. I think that what Daboll has to do personally is commit to running with the running back a little bit more. A lot of his offense is predicated on the fact that the quarterback has legs and can do that. And when you've got a body like Josh Allen, that's a little bit easier, you know, to take all those hits. When you've got a body like Justin Fields, you don't want him taking as many hits as Josh Allen has taken, you know, doing all this kind of stuff. So yeah, you want Justin to use his legs and take advantage of that, but you also want to take the hits off of him in a lot of ways and utilize the run game a little more. So if you're Brian Daboll, one of the things he's going to have to do is adjust a little bit in what he does on offense and run the football with the backs a little bit more. Plus, they've just got to improve that offensive line across the board. That's really Chicago's main problem on offense right now, outside of scheme.
Benjamin Allbright, still here on Sports Talk Chicago. Benjamin, a few more questions before we finish up. First off, is it true that you withdrew from Harvard Law School to be in sports media?
Oh, my God. Okay, so I was accepted at Harvard Law, and I had intended to go. The way that I phrased that online, I said that I withdrew. I just never attended. I stopped and didn't go. So however you want to phrase that, I was accepted and didn't go. However you want to put that, there you go.
How'd your parents feel about it?
Well, my father had passed away several years earlier. My mother was not the biggest fan.
And before we finish up today, last question. Did Jason La Canfora steal an image of yours back in 2016?
Yes, he did, and claimed that he got that text from a general manager, which was utterly ludicrous. He posted the image less than 90 seconds after I had posted the image. There's not enough time for someone to have seen Twitter, pulled the image themselves, turned around and texted it to him to have downloaded it, and then to have retweeted it.
How'd you feel about it?
I was pretty pissed at the time. Now I'm like, it's whatever. You know, I don't really care anymore. It was an innocuous image. It was a screen grab of like a fantasy. I don't even remember what the image was now. It was some kind of fantasy football thing, but it was obvious because it still had like my battery at the top, all my notifications at the top. I mean, it was definitely the same thing. You know, it was definitely I just didn't appreciate the whole like, hey, this is from an NFL GM. Like, no, it isn't. It's literally from my Twitter from less than 90 seconds ago.
Benjamin, thank you so much for joining me. Always appreciate the time. Best wishes out in Denver, and I can't wait till we catch up again soon. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Take care.